Yesterday, I saw a headline from SHRM indicating that diversity and inclusion is the future of work. And it just reminded me about 3 years ago, I started saying something that made a lot of people uncomfortable. I said that DEI as we knew it then wasn't going to survive in its current form. It wasn't because the work was going away, it wasn't because organizations no longer needed it. It was because I believed that the language would become too politicized, too polarizing, and too disconnected from what leaders were actually trying to accomplish. And what we saw was this growing gap between the environment that leaders were operating in over here and how we were talking about the work over here. Leaders were looking for answers around how do we build trust across the team? How do we create a culture where people want to be here and tell others about it? How do we develop our talent and tap into that and retain that talent? How can we make our leaders more effective and increase our performance? But too often the conversation it stayed anchored in this language and frameworks that were designed for a different moment in time. So the social climate shifted, the political climate shifted, business environment shifted. Everything was changing except the way that we were approaching the strategy. Organizations were navigating this economic uncertainty. They were going through these talent shortages. They were going through rapid change, backlash, and polarization, and this intense pressure to deliver results. So problems became more complex, but the tools to address it, they stayed simple and they didn't evolve fast enough to meet the leaders where they were. And when that happens, people stop hearing the message and they start arguing about the label instead. A couple of years ago, it felt like everyone was trying to distance themselves from DEI. You had executive orders flying out of Washington, companies were changing names, programs were being rebranded. Some organizations were getting quieter about the work altogether, and others were eliminating positions and restructuring teams. And at the time, SHRM even pulled the word equity out of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So fast forward to today, and now SHRM is saying that inclusion and diversity, they are the future of work. And what's interesting to me isn't whether SHRM is right or wrong. What's interesting is what it reveals. Because the truth is, the challenges that organizations are facing today, they haven't gone away. In many ways, they've become more complex. Leaders are still trying to navigate these increasingly diverse teams. For the first time in history, we have six generations working alongside one another in the workforce. Think about that for a moment. Six generations. That's six different generations of experiences, six generations of different expectations, different communication styles, different perspectives on work, leadership, technology, and change. And those differences, they go even deeper than the demographics. Recent research shows that about 70% of people are hesitant or unwilling to trust someone who is different from them. Not just someone who looks different, someone who lives by these different core values, someone who believes different facts and trusts different sources, someone who thinks societal problems should be addressed differently, someone who comes from a different cultural background or lifestyle. And when you think about that, it's not hard to see why trust has become one of the biggest leadership challenges of our time. Because leaders aren't simply managing these differences in age, race, gender, or background. They're now leading teams made up of people who often see the world through very different lenses. And yet, those same people still have to collaborate, they still got to innovate, they still have to solve problems together and have to deliver results. And the leaders are still trying to attract the talent and retain that talent. They're trying to build the trust across those different groups. They're trying to manage the conflict. They're trying to create environments where people feel valued enough to be able to contribute their best ideas. And when you remove the label for a moment, those aren't just DEI challenges. Those are leadership challenges. Those are culture challenges. Those are business challenges. And that changes the conversation. But the outcomes that leaders were chasing, those never changed. One of the biggest mistakes we made was spending too much time debating the label and not enough time focusing on the outcome. Because the question was never whether inclusion mattered. I think we all know that. The question was whether we could connect it to the outcomes that leaders were being held accountable for. Things like trust, retention, engagement. How does it make us money, save us money, increase operational efficiency, that triple bottom line? Those are the outcomes that leaders care about. And those are the outcomes that organizations still need because when you strip away all the politics and all the noise, organizations still need people who can work effectively across all those differences. They still need leaders who know how to build trust. They still need cultures where people can collaborate and show up and not be fearful to perform. So call it inclusion, call it culture, call it leadership, call it organizational effectiveness. The label isn't what determines the success, the outcome is. So when I hear conversations about whether DEI is back or whether it's gone away, I think we're asking the wrong question. The question we should be asking is, what does it take for people with different experiences, different perspectives, and backgrounds to succeed together? And that's not a trend. That's not a political issue. And it's certainly not going away. That's the future of work.